All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name's Kiri Lee. I'm the interim director of the Career Planning Development Center.
And I'm Cassie Panera. I'm an assistant director in career planning and development. And today we're going to talk about some next steps for what to do if you've been laid off, hopefully, some kind of checklists and resources and things you can use moving forward.
Yep. And if you have any questions at any point, you can always put those in the chat, and we'll also have some time at the end as well. So one of the first things that you definitely want to think about is as you're leaving that position, you want to make sure to get any clarity on your kind of coverage. So for instance, your health insurance, dental, vision, all of those things. So when does that coverage end? For some workplaces, it may cut off as soon as you leave the workplace. If the end of the month, they might cover it for a certain amount of time if you got a severance package. So you want to make sure and kind of be aware of those. If you need to make any changes to any of your retirement account or savings, making sure you have all the information for that so you can access it later. With HR, make sure that if you're using a portal like ADP or another similar system, that all of your information is updated contact-wise with a stable permanent address and contact information, so you will get all of your tax information for future. Unemployment benefits really vary by region. So, you want to kind of check out wherever you're located locally, if you would be eligible, because that sometimes is going to be different. And then if you are, that can sometimes be a very extended process. So make sure that you get on applying to that right away. That can certainly kind of have its own set of challenges. And then just start kind of researching options for healthcare. So if your former HR maybe had some suggestions or options, or otherwise, if you have to go check out options like on the marketplace or Cobra or things like that. So that's kind of the step one.
You're going to want to take a look at your budget, make sure that you're reducing any non-critical expenses. You're going to want to make sure you can last as long as possible if you have that financial cushion. Determine how long of a financial cushion you have depending on what you've saved. So see how many months ideally you can last without a paycheck. From there, and you can also start looking into some other short-term revenue pathways and see if they're feasible. So to kind of make ends meet in the meantime while you're doing a job search, examples could be DoorDash or Lyft. Some people will jump into those right away, but if you haven't run the numbers to see if doing those could be worth the increased gas expenses, or wear and tear on your car, the benefit may not exceed what kind of you're putting into it. So there are some other example sites that we've included here that could help focus on those short-term freelance or project works that may be a little bit more beneficial. So if the DoorDash or Lyft route is useful for you and you run the cost benefit analysis and it makes sense, then that's definitely a direction you can go. Otherwise, hopefully some of these links will help you get in a direction of another option for that short-term work in the meantime.
So definitely, make sure that you are updating your application materials while it's kind of fresh in your mind. So, depending on how kind of unexpected the layoff situation was, write down just anything that you can think of, particularly quantifiers. So if this is how many people you served through your role, if there were any particular accomplishments, just details about the projects you worked on. Those are all things that you kind of just want to get out, type out on a document so you have it for future, because those are the sorts of details that get harder to remember over time. And I would always suggest that you have a master resume. So, this is a document that's going to have everything. So you don't need to worry about space. This isn't what you're necessarily sending to employers. But then as you're applying to particular places, you can just pull out what's necessary. So, if you're wanting to focus on a particular aspect on your role or particular skills, you can do that. But then you kind of have everything in one place if you ever need to go back. Definitely, if you have a LinkedIn profile, make sure that it is matching your resume. So if somebody is checking you out, whether it's a recruiter, it's, maybe a past colleague that might refer you to something, make sure that it's comprehensive, people understand what you're looking for. So especially if you've had maybe kind of different types of roles in the past, it's not quite as clear what type of thing you might be looking for. If you're deciding now is the time for a shift, you want to make sure kind of your summary, all of that is reflecting those pieces. So depending on how long you work there, it's kind of also up to you what you choose to include on your LinkedIn profile or your resume. So, if you were there for a significant period of time, probably more than like 6 months or something, probably makes sense to list. If this was a really short term, you had just started working there before there were a bunch of layoffs, then is it worthwhile to show skills or is it easier to list, just not listed at all? So sometimes we get asked questions about, should you kind of mention a layoff in your resume and your cover letter? It's ultimately always up to you what you feel comfortable with. So some of the things that I would always think about are, how did the job end? If you had always had great performance reviews and it was truly just a budgeting kind of situation or out of your manager's control, that's very different than if you had maybe had performance issue, there might be a little bit more of that cause. Is that something you want to bring up? Again, length of time in the role, if you were there for 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years, very different of what you might have accomplished in that time, or to sort of speak to that it wasn't necessarily your choice. Um, Also kind of thinking about what's the relevance to what you're currently looking for. And so sometimes it does make sense if you know that they're going to wonder about it. So you don't have to disclose, but like I said, if there's other things that make sense, or sometimes there may be situations like with things going on right now in a lot of federal agencies, people may be kind of wondering already of, did you either voluntarily leave because of things going on? Were you laid off? So if you do decide to disclose, just keep it very factual, and very brief. So, it might just be kind of an aside on your cover letter to say, with, the recent layoffs affecting XYZ department, I've decided to pursue this direction, and this is why I'm so interested in this particular role. So, you don't really need to go into the details, but if that you feel like that might answer some questions in people's mind, it could be helpful to do that. And definitely just kind of avoid bringing up negative information. So if you are making maybe a little bit of a shift, like going from a government workplace to corporate, for instance, I would always talk about why you want to move into something and not why you're leaving something. So kind of keep it focused on the positive, what you're interested about for that aspect. If unfortunately you are in a position where it is kind of an extended period of unemployment, you haven't been able to find something comparable, at a certain point, I think it is helpful to account for that time. So even if it is, part-time work, sort of gig work, other things, if you've done volunteering, it at least shows that you are doing something. Or if, maybe you kind of renewed like your certification, that you're kind of showing that you're keeping your skills fresh. I would say a lot of employers tend to be a little bit more holistic since COVID. You don't get quite so much of that. Well, there's this amount of time on their resume, so there must be, something wrong with them. But there are some people, unfortunately, who are a little bit more judgmental. And I would say typically it's kind of that 6 months line. Like that's where things tend to change from maybe just you stepped away, you were laid off, you're looking for the right opportunity versus are there some other things going on here? So that's kind of what I would say is if you're hitting that point, it may be a good time to take on something else, even if it's not totally related. If you took time off to care for like a family member, a parent, a grandparent, kids, some people will choose to include that as experience. So have something like, caretaker. I wouldn't just list, laid off, unemployed, job searching. I wouldn't list that actually on your resume. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what I would say for that point.
And as you're updating those application materials, you want to go through and make sure that they're as strong as they can be for the direction that you decided to move forward in. It is important to remember it's becoming more and more of an emphasis that you need to customize your materials for each separate job posting and opportunity that you apply for. That sounds like a lot of work, and it is definitely a lot of work, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to revamp the full documents each time. But there are a couple of things that you need to make sure you're paying attention to when you're looking at the job posting, looking at what they're requesting in that wish list of who they're hoping to hire. And if you have those relevant skills and abilities and experiences, you want to make sure that you're reflecting back on your resume the where and the what and the how that you've done each of those. And so those are the kind of small things that will change throughout. You may choose to move your skills up to the top if you have a specific relevant skill that they're looking for, different things. So it's going to be adjusted each time. Typically for resumes, you want to make sure you're outlining those notable skills, strengths, and experiences in private sector. So if you're moving from the federal sector to the private sector, this is going to be a big change for you in that you want that resume down to 1 or 2 pages, which feels a very drastic change, I know. But you're listing, what is most relevant. You're not listing your whole life experience anymore. And so that's how you fit that onto that 1 to 2 pages. You want to make sure that your formatting is consistent and reasonable. Consider all the different sources of experience that could be relevant. So even if it wasn't paid experience, but like Carrie mentioned earlier, if you have new certifications or if you've done volunteer work with this specific population that you're looking to go into working with now, those are things that you want to have on your resume because they could be relevant. Make sure that you're reviewing the content as if you were the employer or the intended audience reading it. What are they going to care about? What are they going to have additional questions about? What do they may not care as much about? And make sure you're asking others to review and provide feedback as well. Because if you're doing everything in a vacuum, you may not catch things that someone else might catch or have questions on. And we have included resources, our guidelines for private sector resume writing and formatting. And so we'll make this presentation available so that people can click through these other resources that we have provided as well. And then similarly with your cover letter. With your resume and cover letter, if they're well written enough, it may prompt an employer to invite you to an interview. That's kind of step one. And to see if they want to learn more about you, see if you're a good potential fit. And so while you're highlighting those relevant skills and abilities on your cover letter and your resume, you're also using the cover letter to express why you're interested in that company, why you're interested in that organization or position, and then what relevant skills you're bringing to the table. And so you want to take some time to have done some research on that company, maybe what projects they're working on, what client base they serve, what direction the company might be headed in, and show that you've done that research and show why you're passionate about working for them. And so that piece is probably going to change a lot more on your cover letter for each role you apply to than those relevant skills and abilities, because those tend to be similar across postings. And so you may not need to adjust those as much as, why this specific company, why this specific position. Make sure you're proofreading. This is your resume and your cover letter are samples of your work product. So you want them to be your best foot forward. And we've linked some cover letter writing guidelines here as well.
Yeah, and definitely you want to make sure that you are connecting with your network. So I know sometimes, being laid off, losing a job can be an incredibly stressful experience, but try not to isolate yourself too much. Talk with your kind of recent colleagues, supervisors, other people that you would potentially use as references. So, LinkedIn is obviously an easy way to keep track of people, or while you still have people's, work information, if you can get their personal connections, because if a lot of people are leaving at the same time, you want to make sure that you still have good contact information for future, or if you're happy to serve as a reference for them too, kind of that reciprocal relationship. Always ask though, because, for some people, they may not feel as comfortable, like if they just didn't work with you directly very much, or for whatever reason. So it's better to make sure that you get people who are enthusiastic about you, who are going to be responsive. And, there's always opportunities that either are not super publicly posted, or that they're going to look at your application potentially more closely if they know something more about you than just the resume and cover letter that everyone has to submit. So sometimes that is something that can kind of push you into getting an interview. So at least then you have the opportunity to explain more about your skills and your interests. So in Handshake, which you are always, able to access if you want to as an alumni, you can look through those events. So employers will host events. Sometimes these are kind of more information sessions about current recruiting opportunities, information about different career pathways at that company. So we host events through our office, but also employers do as well. So that's always good just to keep an eye, see what's out there. For some of them, they do promote to a number of universities. So there may be a good amount of people on the call. For some of them, there might be 5 or 10 people. And so you actually could have a little bit of FaceTime and are able to talk with a recruiter in real time. So definitely check that out. There are other campus events going on. So for instance, sometimes the business school hosts events for their students. There are other networking opportunities out there as well. So if you're part of a professional association, they may have in-person or virtual events. There are sometimes community events. So like I know the local libraries have had, entrepreneurship days with things for entrepreneurs in the community. The Cortex has networking events for different groups as well. So I would always suggest that, you're checking out places like your local library, places like, Eventbrite or Meetup, things like that, to kind of get a pulse on what might be happening in your area. If you are reaching out to folks, I would always encourage you to personalize that message if you don't know them, particularly well. It's not a recent colleague or something, because it's just going to help people understand, who are you? Why are you contacting me? What are you looking for? And so if you're not providing that information and it's not clear, they may just think, are you trying to sell me something? Are you just trying to ask me for a job? And they may just ignore that request. So I would suggest, if it's somebody you don't know well, kind of come at it from that informational approach. So, saying, this is why I'm interested in talking to you. Do you have a few minutes to talk over Zoom, to grab some coffee and talk about your career path? What was your experience going from the federal sector to the private sector? Or, what advice would you have for somebody in this area? So that kind of may be able to get you some useful information, and it can sometimes develop into a longer term relationship as well.
And throughout this all, you want to make sure to remember that you're taking care of yourself. Being laid off can be a huge stressor, and we know that. Um, Looking for a job is oftentimes considered a full-time job in itself. So pace yourself. You want to make sure you're putting in quality effort into those applications and application materials. So set a schedule for yourself if it feels like it's really overwhelming and you're not sure, if you feel like you have to apply to 20 jobs on day one, that can be really overwhelming. So, give yourself a day or two to get your materials together, give some time to get that search done, save those jobs, and then apply to a couple at a time as you're developing those materials for each one. Take time to focus on other things as well. Maybe you are going back to some of the basics of doing some volunteer time in a passion area or developing skills or updating your certifications. You can spread your time out as you need. Um, Take the time that you need, but try not to isolate yourself and find some of those healthy coping mechanisms or enjoyable activities. You want to make sure you're keeping it all in perspective. Remember that many people go through layoffs and it's not a determining factor of your value as a person or a reflection on how good you are at your job. It's oftentimes even out of like company control. They're just cutting numbers, and that's what they're doing there. Um, and don't get discouraged. It only takes one yes from an employer. So make sure that you're still keeping up on all of those things because that's all you're looking for is that one yes. Take care of your mental health, access those mental health resources as needed, and it's definitely okay if you need some extra support in that area.
So then as you're applying for opportunities, sometimes these experiences can be a good moment for you to reflect and to think on, where am I going right now? Do you want to look for the same type of role? Are you looking for maybe a different type of experience? So maybe you want to stay in your area, but looking at a different organization or a different type of industry, because maybe you were feeling a little bit burnt out already. Um, for some folks, maybe it makes sense at this point in your career, you have the expertise to open up your own business, or to do consulting, or maybe that is easier to feel like you have the experience and the connections to do that than to try and wait and, get in the door at another organization. So some people choose to make that move. Or, you may feel like this is the time for you to make a shift. Maybe it feels like this is sort of longer term forecasting. Maybe your area is not quite as stable as it once was. Is it worthwhile to think about your other interests? So, as you're kind of looking at job postings, try to think realistically about your competitiveness. Are there a lot of skills popping up on those job descriptions that you haven't had much experience with, or it's been a while since you've done something? Certain industries, certain companies may use different types of software platforms. They may have slightly different processes. Are there other credentials that could be helpful? If everyone's asking for SAP certification or, Six Sigma, and that's something you don't have, it might be worthwhile to at least look into it. Or even if you don't pursue that, to have a little bit of knowledge on what those are like. So think about what's kind of required versus what are those preferred qualifications on job postings, because, for some people, they tend to screen themselves out and say, well, I feel like I'm not 100% meeting these qualifications. There's research that statistically a lot of times like women do this more commonly, or, people from underrepresented groups. I would kind of think about that 75% rule. You want to feel like, yes, you're mostly meeting the qualifications that they're asking for, but if they want 5 years of experience and you have 4 and you meet all the other qualifications, don't let that stop you, because that job description is a wish list and they may or may not be able to get people who meet every aspect on that posting. And also, are they willing to work for the salary that they're offered? So, You never know who else is in the pool. So give yourself a little bit of room, because if you're already overqualified coming in the door, you may be very competitive, but there may not be as much room for you to actually grow in that role. So think about what is most important to you. So, whatever your values are, if you really value the ability to work hybrid or to work remote, if you care about the mission, that you feel like you're doing something good for the community, and that's what you care about at the end of the day, if it's salary, there's no right or wrong, but just kind of weigh that in your mind to think about what is most critical for you. And just to think about sort of what have you learned from your past experiences. So if you know that, maybe there's a particular type of leadership or supervision style that is much more comfortable for you, then, that's something that you want to be vetting as you're talking to employers, you're interviewing. Make sure that, it feels like they're at a compatible style with you. So we just have some kind of other resources linked here, and then I'll let Cassie talk about Handshake.
So as an alumni, if you don't already have a Handshake account, you can request one. And so we've linked instructions on this presentation where you can, get to that page and get your Handshake account requested. And then you can use all of the following tools. You can use that event tool that we mentioned earlier. And so Handshake does act as a job board. You can search for jobs, filter by areas of interest. You can try filtering by your major or program title or various industries to see if different roles that you might not have thought of with a keyword search pop up kind of thing. You can narrow by location, narrow by internships or part-term positions if you are still looking for something while you're in school. And once you have that set of filters that you feel like is, best fitting what you're looking for, you can set up a saved search where you get automatic alerts anytime new positions are uploaded that fit those areas of interest. So it's doing some of that work in the background for you. There may be other job boards that allow this as well. So keep an eye out for that, of being able to save your searches and have some of that background search going on for you. You can also search for employers in Handshake, and look at, different people, different students who may have, given them a review in Handshake or had an experience with them. They typically also have some contact information, maybe an HR email or a specific contact. If you're ever looking to follow up, that may be an option, or they may have a specific recruiter with a profile in Handshake that you may be able to message for questions or follow up. You can also just go directly to their website link from their Handshake page to see if there are further roles posted on that company website. It takes a lot of time and energy to cross post across all job boards. So if you're looking at a specific company, going to their website's always the best. It's going to be the most up to date with opportunities that they have. And so, check out their websites, learn about their employment opportunities, their mission values, all those types of things that can get you started there. We've also started a feature called the Handshake Collections. And so these are great kind of compilations that we've tried to pull together for people and, graduated from various programs, working in various industries. And so this will pull job postings and company listings all into one place. Some of the categories are fairly broad, so each job posting may not be applicable for one specific person, but we're hoping that it sets that pre-filter list for you to get started on seeing what jobs are on there, and considering what companies are on there as well. Oftentimes there will be less jobs posted than there are companies listed. And again, that's a great way to say, okay, there's so many companies here, they're just not posting their roles all in Handshake. So I'm going to go to their company website and see if they have anything else available. And something else you want to maintain while you're kind of applying and searching is staying organized is going to really help you during your application process. So because you're making sure that your application materials are specific to each posting, you want to set up a naming strategy of some sort so that you know which materials are for which application. Some people like to, build a spreadsheet to keep track of applications that they've applied to or applications they want to apply to, when the closing dates are, those types of things. We always recommend saving any job descriptions for roles that you apply to, because those are often removed later on from websites. And when it comes time for an interview, you're going to want to review that job posting, or just have a reminder of, hey, I've been reached out to talk about my application for this role, but I don't remember what they said it was about. And so saving those job descriptions somewhere is going to really come in handy for you later. And having that clear organizational system, naming convention, will help you stay organized as much as possible as you're applying, remembering when you applied to things, when you need to follow up, setting reminders on when that might be a possibility. And this whole time you're finding that balance between the quantity and the quality of the work that you're submitting out. And it's much different when you use the same resume to quick apply to 200 LinkedIn postings than if you took some time to carefully craft your resume and cover letter for 10 specific postings that are really speaking to you, kind of thing.
So, as always, you want to sort of try to have a good mindset as much as you can. So, sort of hope for the best, but plan for the worst case scenario. And, if you've kind of thought about those financial pieces for you and what that looks like, what's the point where you sort of need to consider broadening your search? Do you have a certain time frame where you feel fairly comfortable with your financial expenses? And when is the point that you really have to find something, even if it's not quite the best fit for you? So, you want to keep that in mind. So you're kind of having these check-in points to think about. Maybe you are a little bit further along in your career, you've been in more management positions. Are you willing to drop down into slightly lower level positions or more individual contributor positions? Do you need to look into a larger geographic area? Sometimes certain industries may be more represented in certain locations. If there's been a lot of layoffs in the area, maybe that's impacting where a lot of people are looking for the same types of roles, but you might have a little bit better luck searching elsewhere, looking at different industries. If you do need to kind of make that decision to take employment that is a little bit less related to your current goals, accepting a lower salary, or, considering like a contract position, so going through a staffing or a temp agency to kind of at least keep your foot in the door for some places, or just thinking about other sources of revenue, whether that's, kind of gig work, other kind of freelance projects, things along those lines.
And through this all, remember, focus on what you can control. You can choose how to present yourself to employers. You can control some aspects of the job process, the job search process, but you can't control the outcome necessarily. So be sure to not tie your self-esteem or your confidence level to those outcomes. The areas that you can exert influence over are your applications, the quality of the work that you're submitting. You can control communicating and networking with employers and contacts, that resume and cover letter updating, preparing yourself for interviews that you have coming up. You can control learning new skills or updating those certifications. And you can also control learning from rejection. So, if you don't make it to the next step in a process, what can you learn from that instance? Can you reach out to the employer for feedback on what they were looking for and what you were missing? Turn all of those rejections into learning opportunities to continue to increase your abilities and applications for future applications.
So as Cassie mentioned, we'll share the recording with you and the presentation so you can review it at your leisure, or check out some of our other resources. So we do have a variety of information available on our website. Under that kind of alumni tab, you can find some kind of key information on different career topics. And then if you are a current student or a recent alumni that can still access connections, we do also have resources on our connections page. We do offer appointments through Handshake for alumni who have graduated within the last year. So if you have other questions, you're welcome to reach out to us. And thank you so much for joining us today.